On the phone with me right now, Jason Beardsley joins the show. He has 22 years of service in the Army and Navy, 15 years leading Army Special Forces ops in Iraq, the Horn of Africa, West Bank, Gaza Strip. Basically, if there's been a hot spot somewhere in the world, he's been there with the fire hose. Currently, he's a Special Operations Advisor for Concerned Veterans for America. You'll remember those were the folks who brought Madison Rising here to town last year, and we're hoping to get them back again later on this year. And they do a lot of great work for veterans across the country. Jason, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us here on the C.L. Bryant Show.
Hey, you bet. I appreciate you, Steve, having me on tonight. And, of course, it's an issue that means a lot to those of us in service or have been in service. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think the big topic today is the announcement by the president this morning that we accidentally killed an American and an Italian hostage in a strike. And I know that you've done special ops work. I'm not sure that you can tell me everything you've done, but I'm assuming you've had at least some experience with trying to deal with hostage extraction at some point. Is that right?
Well, in general, we've had a lot of situations that are very complex on the battlefield, and many times they deal with innocence and collateral damage. The first thing I want to say, though, is, our hearts grieve today, and they go out to those families, the Weinstein family. This is a doctor who's put his career on the line to serve others, and so this is a tough incident, and we would just want to share with those families how much we respect the honor and the service that they did. After that, though, those of us who have served in the uniform, we've recognized, first of all, the inherent complexities and the dangers involved in missions that involve either hostages or complex targets. And we're talking now, again, about Waziristan and northwest Pakistan. These are tough areas, one, to get into, and they're very tough to build actual fidelity on what's inside that target. And to do that well, we really need a stronger will. Lack of fidelity is one thing, but lack of will in these organizations, these operations, that leads us into very difficult places, and you can see the consequences now. It's a hard day for those of us who to continually watch what we'll call a lack of will in our policy.
Let me ask you about that, because you talk about a lack of fidelity and a lack of will. Explain the difference in your opinion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we talk about with lack of fidelity is inside a target zone like this or in an operation, fidelity means we have a confidence that the target is what we've estimated it to be. We've put assets in place, we've valued those assets, and we've taken the time to look with true veracity what's happening on the ground.
So you have a good idea of what is there, and you believe that what you know is right.
Absolutely, and it usually means putting men and women in harm's way or developing a lot of relationships that we can lean in on, like the Pakistani government, foreign intelligence services, and those of our allies who are willing to share with us. We can lean in on them and say, hey, what's happening on the ground? But let me tell you, this is a very complex thing to do from a remote monitoring situation. So you think ISR or drones that are loitering overhead in patterns. Those drones have a very difficult time picking up what's happening inside a compound, inside a building. And the estimate right now is that the White House, the administration, is stating that we've hit this as a compound or a facility of Al-Qaeda. What that really means is we didn't have a high degree of fidelity or truth of what was happening inside those buildings. And now we know, looking backwards, that what was happening inside is they were maintaining hostages. So that's lack of fidelity, and then we'll talk about lack of will.
And this happened in January of this year. It's just now coming out now. But basically, a drone was overhead. It was a drone strike that went in and hit that, and as you said earlier, is collateral damage for both the American Warren Weinstein and an Italian captive there. All right, now explain to me what you mean by lack of will.
Well, lack of will is really a derivative of our elected leaders and what they have either done or not done to lead sort of the international community in the fight against the terrorists. So lack of will looks like troops on the ground in harm's way that don't have a clear objective and are not able to execute well-planned, well-thought-out policies and operations because our will is a bit ambiguous. This is tantamount to doing everything but really executing the targets. It's almost like the administration is willing to do a little but not a lot. And so the value or the priority of the hostages first, number one, has to be estimated. We have to give that to our military leaders and say, what are the best methodologies? What are the best ways to actually recover our hostages? If we haven't got that from the military, then we're relaxed and we're looking at using drones or technology to sort of to make up for that gap of knowledge on the ground. And when we do that, when we rely on remote intelligence capacity, it's very hard to go a long time doing that without having consequences of this nature. And these consequences are a little bit high for us.
Are you saying it's a lazy way to fight a war?
Well, what I would say is if we really want to be aggressive about it, in order to value those targets, we have to say, look, we're willing to either put men and women in harm's way to go get the truth of this, or if we don't think the target's of that substantial nature, maybe we ought to think twice about going after it. And this is a case where we can say, look, remember what the White House has said is we struck the compound, not the individuals. Now, this is possibly a bit of parsing of the truth. You know, if we're hitting a Al-Qaeda compound on the ground, we should have some pretty good reason why we're hitting that. We haven't heard that yet, and if you look at the incident, we've killed two terrorists who were Americans, Adam Gaddan and Ahmed Farouk. I think Farouk was in the strike that had the collateral damage on the hostages. We're not sure about Adam Gaddan, but what the White House is saying in essence is, yes, we're relying on our remote capacity to do this, and the end result is we have to go back now and make some apologies to the family and really dig deep.
Hey, Michelle, you had a question.
It had to do with the lack of will, and I hear you talking about the president, but for the simple, like myself, it's kind of complicated because he makes decisions, but what about the generals involved? Are you saying that the lack of will also sprinkles into the senators and representatives who make decisions? I mean, where do you identify that lack of will? Is it everybody that's running this war, or is it particularly in the White House?
We have about 30 seconds till the break.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. Well, let's talk about our elected leadership. They need to be led into this, and that really that comes from the people up. And in other words, the generals really can't move autonomously. They have to get their direction from the White House. So the White House and our Senate and Congress really need to feel this from the ground up, from the people. So if we value this, then we ought to say that to our elected leaders. They can then go and ask the generals to give them their best recommendations.
We're talking with Jason Beardsley, the Special Operations Advisor for Concerned Veterans for America. You're listening to the C.L. Bryant Show. I'm Stephen Parr. Michelle's here. CL's on the road. And we will be right back with more with Jason Beardsley talking about the situation in Yemen. Welcome back to the C.L. Bryant Show. I'm Stephen Parr, sitting in the studio with Michelle. C.L. is on the road. He's in Florida, spreading the good word, heading up towards the coast this weekend, and got several big, high-profile events that he's going to be the spokesman at. It's actually what he's doing right now, is talking to large groups and spreading the word. Tell them about empowerment. On the phone right now, we have Jason Beardsley, is a special ops expert, has worked in, and by worked, he carried a gun around Iraq, the Horn of Africa, West Bank, Gaza Strip. He's currently the Special Operations Advisor for Concerned Veterans for America. I want to go back to the point that you were making just as we had to end there, Jason, and you were saying that we need to apply, if the people want us to either fight or not fight, not this halfway fight that we're doing, we need to apply pressure to our political leaders, to not just the president, but also all the way up the line. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things you can be sure of is our armed forces, our military elite, as well as the regular military and our intelligence community. These are professionals that have trained their whole lives to get into situations like this, and to make sure that we give our commanders and we give back to the American people the best work we can. But to do that really requires a commitment of will from the political leadership. And right now, what we've seen right now is there's a vacuum of leadership in the Middle East, and our allies are looking for us to lead the way, our Gulf state allies, the Israelis, and meanwhile, you can watch the leadership is sort of begging off sort of the fight while we're working on the other hand to really support countries like Iran, where we're working to sign deals there. We've got Bo Bergdahl, who was released for 5 Guantanamo prisoners. So what we're talking about right now is that elected leadership spending their capital and spending their will to go out and give the military and the intelligence community the authority to truly go after these either high-value targets or recover our Americans.
You were talking about Iran. I want to move to another hot spot in Yemen. And part of what's going on in Yemen right now, the Houthi rebels are being supplied by Iran. Now that we can talk about the boats that got turned around earlier today, but you've been in that general area. You've been right across in the Horn of Africa. That's pretty close to Yemen. What is your thought on what's going on in Yemen right now? What has the U.S. done, and what should the U.S. have done?
Well, again, this is really just another sad case where the United States has given up our role as leaders in the Middle East. And when you say things like, let's lead from behind, this is really what you get. Our allies are now taking the front or the brunt of this violence, whether it's in Yemen or whether it's in Egypt or whether it's in Syria. With Yemen, remember, we gave up an embassy. We had Marines who were actually moving to the airport, a civilian airport, that had to leave their guns in place and smash their guns because of the overrun of the embassy there. This is a place that only 6 months ago or so, the White House, the administration said Yemen is an example of the positive effect of our counterterror policy. Well, right now we've now just about lost Yemen, and we're scrambling to catch up and keep the Iranians from supplying the Houthi rebels on the ground with these weapons. So we are now, rather than being leaders, we're actually followers. We're reacting, and this is not the role that America has. America is the greatest country in the world. What we need to do is we need to stand up. We need to believe in ourselves, establish the goals out front, and then let the military and the intelligence community come up with the right plans, resourced by Congress, to execute this war, prosecute the war in the right way.
Actually, the way we've been fighting in Yemen is the exact same way we were fighting in Pakistan, which actually cost this American hostage his life. We've got drones there, and we'll launch an attack sporadically, maybe 1 or 2 a month.
Right. We got to 9/11 for a very specific reason. Remember, our intelligence community for years had kind of done a bit of a retrograde and looked at technology as a way, satellites and things. Drones are no different. It's a remote platform with a camera on it. It's usually they can provide some fidelity. But again, when I talked about truth and confidence on the ground, it's when we get men and women sometimes in harm's way. It's a little bit riskier, but if it's valuable to us, in other words, if the nation says, if the political leaders say this is important, remember, our service members, our military community, our intelligence community, we are excellent at this work when given the opportunity to do it well. We have to be decisive, we have to be goal-oriented, and we have to be clear-minded about what we're doing. When we don't have that, what we have right now is ambiguity, and so our forces are really catching up with, and then we're coming up to places where we're using or relying on that technology to really cover the gap on the ground. That's always going to give us, we're always going to have higher consequences with that. This is an example of those.
But this is actually a repeat of some of the mistakes of, and I really thought we had learned these, but the mistakes of Vietnam. We went to Vietnam and we half fought a war. We said, we're not going to go past this point. We're not going to do this. You have to stay here. You can't shoot till you're shot at. We're doing the same thing here. We're half fighting a war on terrorism. We're not really going to go after them, but we've got drones out there. Why haven't we learned this lesson?
Well, again, this is because our service member, that we want to honor our men and women who are
absolutely.
To do that, we really have to inspire our leadership. Remember, the folks in Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, they really need to hear from the people what it is the people are wanting. And we know that when we put military and intelligence professionals into harm's way, we need to support them with the right type of political will. And that's what I mean by lack of will. We can't fight these things half-hearted. If we do, we're going to run into these consequences over and over again. We lose cities like Tikrit and Ramadi. We have to fight for those back. We lose embassies in Yemen. We lose an embassy in Syria. We lose an embassy in Libya. So in all of these conditions, this is an example of our politicians making a determination. Remember, the policy is lead from behind. Well, that policy is a disaster. And oh, by the way, when our Gulf state allies, when our Arab allies and our Israeli allies are asking for the United States to demonstrate leadership, the last thing we ought to be doing is giving that leadership up and looking for someone else to come up with a solution.
Because someone else will come up with a solution, and we probably won't like it. Let me ask a question. You've been in hotspots. You have been places that we probably should know you've been. Is there a difference from a soldier's viewpoint on the ground? Can you feel the difference when leadership is behind you and when leadership is not behind you? When leadership's giving you the support you need to execute your mission and they're not, do you notice the difference on the ground?
Absolutely. There's no doubt as a soldier on the ground or an intelligence officer, you know precisely when you're being backed. And the difference is you have a clear goal, you have the authority, and you have the approval to execute the mission in the way that it is most protects our American lives and our American interests. When we don't have that, what you have is you have to sit in places that are gray and ambiguous, a little bit fuzzy, and you kind of have to react to the situation. Our soldiers, our service members, ought not be reacting to the enemy. We ought to be telling them what we're doing. So we're in the wrong position if we're leading from behind. We need to lead from the front. The way we're doing this right now is not an effective plan. It's more like hope, and as you know, hope is not a plan.
Jason, thank you so much for joining us here on the C.L. Bryant Show. You've been very